All right, so today we're diving into a book that's known for stirring up some philosophical debate.
Yeah.
Atheism, The Case Against God by George H. Smith.
Oh, a classic.
Now, before you think this is going to be like super dry and academic,
Right.
let me assure you,
Mm-hmm.
Smith is really good at making complex ideas engaging, even witty at times.
I agree, yeah.
It's more like a deep dive into a perspective
Yeah.
you might not hear every day.
Uh-huh.
And it really gives you a chance to challenge some assumptions
Oh, yeah, for sure.
you might not even realize you have.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about assumptions, right? You don't even know they're there until someone points them out.
Exactly. And Smith does a great job of that.
He does, yeah.
So for someone who's maybe only heard a little about atheism or has
Mhm.
some preconceived notions,
Right.
where does Smith even begin to lay out his case?
Well, right off the bat, he tackles a lot of the misconceptions surrounding atheism,
Yeah.
what it is, what it isn't. He emphasizes that at its core, atheism is simply the absence of belief in a god.
So it's not like
It's not a belief system in itself.
joining a club
Right.
with like a set of rules or anything.
Exactly. It doesn't come prepackaged with like a set of moral principles or a political ideology or anything like that.
Okay, so you could have two people who are both atheists,
Absolutely.
but have totally different views on everything else.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And Smith actually uses a great analogy to illustrate this.
Oh, what's that?
He says, imagine you and I both don't believe in unicorns.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily tell us anything else about our worldviews, right?
Right.
We might have completely different opinions on politics or art or even
Pineapple on pizza?
pineapple on pizza.
The
Exactly.
important stuff.
The big questions.
Yeah, okay. So it's more about a lack of belief than a whole belief system
Exactly.
built around that lack.
Right.
But then how does he move from debunking those myths to actually building a case
Right.
against the existence of God?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Smith turns his attention to the traditional concept of the Christian God,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the idea of God possessing these unlimited attributes,
Okay, so like
omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence.
quick vocabulary lesson.
Sure.
What do those big words actually mean?
All right, so omnipotence means all-powerful,
Mm-hmm.
omniscience means all-knowing,
Okay.
and omnibenevolence means all-good.
Okay, so
These are the classic attributes that are assigned to the Judeo-Christian God.
the ultimate superhero?
Exactly, God with all the best superpowers.
Right. But how does Smith use these attributes to argue against God's existence?
He does it by pointing out the inherent contradictions that come up when you try to reconcile these absolute qualities.
Okay.
For example, if God is all-powerful,
Mm-hmm.
can he create a rock so heavy that even he can't lift it?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It's a classic philosophical riddle that
Right.
highlights this paradox of omnipotence.
So it's not just about saying, I don't believe this.
No, it's deeper than that.
It's about using logic
Exactly.
to sort of poke holes in the very concept
Mm-hmm.
of this being who's supposed to be perfect.
You got it.
That's a pretty bold approach,
It is.
especially considering
Yeah.
how deeply ingrained the idea of God is.
Yeah. In our culture, our history,
Pretty much everywhere you look.
for sure.
So how does Smith approach that?
Well, he's not afraid to challenge those deeply held beliefs.
Okay.
He's essentially saying,
Mhm.
if we're going to talk about God, let's be precise with our language
Okay.
and examine whether these attributes can logically coexist.
So really taking it apart piece by piece.
Exactly. And that leads him to what's probably the most contentious part of his argument,
Oh, what's that?
this conflict between reason and faith.
All right. Now this is where things could get a little spicy, I feel like.
little heated.
Faith is often presented as this untouchable realm.
Right.
It's beyond the reach of logic or reason.
Beyond question, yeah.
So how does Smith even begin to tackle that?
Well, he starts by defining faith as belief without or even in spite of reason.
Okay.
He argues that while we might accept things on faith in our everyday lives,
Like trusting a doctor's diagnosis.
exactly, you're not a medical expert, but you trust that they have the knowledge and the evidence
Right.
to back up their claims.
But when it comes to God, he's saying that's not enough.
Yeah, he's saying that when it comes to the existence of God, relying solely on faith
Mm-hmm.
is a really shaky foundation for belief.
So he's drawing a distinction between the kind of faith
Yeah,
we might have in a trusted professional versus blind faith in something.
absolutely. That's a key distinction for him.
Okay, and he takes a step further by saying,
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to base our entire worldview on something,
Right.
shouldn't we demand more than just
Yeah.
because I feel it in my heart?
He would say, absolutely, yes.
It's like the difference between saying, I believe this bridge is safe
Hmm.
because engineers designed it,
With sound principles using physics.
versus I believe it's safe
I
because...
closed my eyes and wished really hard.
Exactly. You'd probably feel a little more secure
I think so.
crossing the engineer's design bridge.
For sure.
So Smith's argument is, when it comes to something as big as the existence of God,
Yeah.
we should demand more than just blind faith.
We should demand evidence.
Evidence, reason, logical consistency.
Exactly. Those are the cornerstones of his argument.
So how does that play out?
Well, that's where his exploration of skepticism comes in.
Oh, okay. So
And that's where Smith's exploration of skepticism comes in. You know, he doesn't just dismiss faith outright. He really dives into the philosophical arguments for and against different forms of skepticism.
skepticism. So like doubting everything. Isn't that a bit extreme? I mean, how can you
Right.
even function in the world if you're always questioning everything?
That's a common misconception about skepticism. You know, Smith actually breaks down various types of skepticism, even the ones that seem kind of absurd on the surface. He uses this example of someone who doubts their own senses, like questioning whether the world they perceive is even real.
Okay, I can see how that would make daily life pretty challenging.
Yeah, to say the least. But Smith's point is to illustrate the limits of that kind of extreme skepticism. He argues that even the act of doubting requires some level of knowledge, you know, and reliance on reason. If you doubt absolutely everything, you end up in this philosophical dead end, unable to really say anything about the world or even your own existence.
That's like trying to argue against the existence of language,
Yeah.
but using language to make your argument.
Precisely. And by dissecting and ultimately dismissing those extreme forms of skepticism, Smith reinforces the importance of reason and evidence as tools for understanding the world. He's not saying we should just blindly accept everything we're told, but that we need a framework for evaluating claims,
Right.
distinguishing between belief and knowledge.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between blind faith and paralyzing doubt. But what about the people who say, okay, I use reason and evidence for everyday things, but when it comes to God, you need a different kind of knowing, like a spiritual intuition that goes beyond logic. How does Smith address that?
Well, he tackles this head-on, as he does with most counter-arguments. Remember, Smith is a stickler for clarity, you know, and intelligibility. He argues that if someone claims to have knowledge, regardless of its source, they have a responsibility to explain what they know and how they know it.
So it's not enough to just say, I feel it in my soul. You need to be able to articulate what this so-called spiritual knowledge actually reveals about the nature of God or the universe.
Exactly. It's about holding those claims to the same standards of scrutiny as any other knowledge claim. If you're claiming to perceive God through some non-sensory means, explain how that perception works. What does it tell you that we can't learn through observation or reason?
It's like claiming you have a sixth sense that lets you detect invisible unicorns. It's a fascinating claim.
Yeah.
But how do we test it? How do we know it's not just your imagination?
Wright Smith would agree with you there. He demands that these claims be subjected to the same rigor as any scientific hypothesis. And this leads us to one of the most controversial aspects of his book, his critique of the Bible.
Okay, this is where things could get a little sensitive. For a lot of people, the Bible is considered the literal word of God, a source of divine revelation.
And Smith doesn't shy away from that. He takes a very critical approach, dissecting the inconsistencies, the contradictions, and often disturbing passages found within the Bible. He highlights the historical inaccuracies, the moral dilemmas, and the vast discrepancies between different interpretations.
He even points out that some of the stories, like the one about God killing the firstborn of Egypt, raise some serious ethical questions.
To say the least, right.
Right.
His point isn't to shock or offend, but to challenge this notion that the Bible is the infallible, inerrant Word of God. He encourages readers to view the Bible through a historical lens, recognizing it as a product of its time, written by humans with their own beliefs, biases, and agendas.
So acknowledging that it's a historical document rather than a divine dictation.
Precisely. And he goes on to explore how the Bible has been interpreted throughout history, highlighting how different sects of Christianity have often twisted and contorted the text to fit their pre-existing beliefs.
Which is kind of ironic, right? If the Bible is supposed to be this clear and unambiguous revelation from God, You'd think there wouldn't be so much room for debate and disagreement.
That's exactly the point Smith is making. He's highlighting the inherent subjectivity of biblical interpretation, how even those who claim to base their beliefs solely on Scripture end up cherry-picking passages, ignoring inconvenient parts, and imposing their own biases on the text.
It's like saying the Bible speaks for itself, while simultaneously arguing with others about what exactly it's saying.
Yeah. And Smith sees this as a major flaw in using the Bible as the foundation for belief. He argues that this reliance on faith, this willingness to kind of bend and twist evidence to fit preconceived notions, ultimately undermines the pursuit of truth. And this brings us to his analysis of the classic arguments for the existence of God.
Okay, so we're talking about the cosmological argument, the design argument, all those attempts to prove God through logic and reason.
Yes, Smith meticulously dissects these arguments, examining their premises, assumptions, and logical leaps. He plays the role of this philosophical detective, uncovering the flaws and weaknesses in each line of reasoning.
So he's not just dismissing them as outright foolish,
Mm-hmm.
but showing how they don't hold up under really rigorous scrutiny.
Exactly. He points out the circular reasoning, the hidden assumptions, and the reliance on vague or undefined concepts that plague these arguments. For instance, take the cosmological argument, which attempts to prove God's existence by arguing that the universe must have a first cause.
Right, the classic who created God dilemma.
Yeah.
If everything needs a creator, then who created the creator?
Yeah.
It leads to this infinite regress.
Right, and that's where the argument breaks down. Smith points out that if theists are willing to accept that God is uncaused, then why not simply accept that the universe itself is uncaused? Why add this extra layer of complexity and mystery?
It seems like saying, we need to invent a magical being to explain where the universe came from. But that just raises the question of where the magical being came from.
Precisely, Smith argues that the cosmological argument, while initially appealing, doesn't actually solve the problem it's trying to solve. It simply pushes the mystery back a step. He applies similar reasoning to his critique of the design argument.
The classic, look at the amazing design of the human eye. It must have been created by God argument.
Exactly. But Smith argues that this line of reasoning is based on a false dichotomy. Either the universe is the result of pure chance, or it's the product of conscious design. He proposes a third option: natural processes operating according to the laws of physics and chemistry.
So complexity and order can arise naturally, without needing a divine architect to micromanage every detail.
That's the idea. He points to the incredible self-organizing capabilities of nature, how systems can evolve and adapt over time through processes like natural selection, without needing any external conscious intervention.
So it's like saying a snowflake's intricate design doesn't prove the existence of a cosmic snowflake maker. It's just a result of how water molecules behave under certain conditions.
A great analogy. Smith advocates for this naturalistic explanation of the universe, grounded in our understanding of how the natural world works. He's not saying we have all the answers, but that science and reason provide the best tools for uncovering those answers.
Okay, so Smith has cast doubt on these traditional arguments for God's existence. But he doesn't stop there, does he? He goes on to examine the implications of believing in God, particularly the impact of religious belief on our lives and our understanding of morality.
Right. That's where things get even more fascinating. Smith doesn't hold back in his critique of religious morality, especially the version presented by Christianity, and that's what we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive. Smith doesn't hold back in his critique of religious morality, especially the version presented by Christianity.
This is where things could get a little tricky, right? I mean, for a lot of people, religion is seen as the bedrock of morality.
It's definitely a sensitive topic, but Smith isn't condemning morality itself or saying atheists have a monopoly on ethical behavior.
Right.
He's looking at the kind of morality that's promoted by religion.
Particularly Christianity.
And questioning if it's really good for human flourishing.
So he's not saying all religious people are bad or that atheism makes you a saint.
Exactly.
He's taking a more nuanced look at the framework of religious morality.
Right. And one of the first things he points out is this authoritarian nature of religious morality.
Okay.
You know, it's all about following rules laid down by a higher power.
Often without questioning.
Right. Often without understanding the reasoning behind those rules.
Kind of like, because I said so, parenting, but on a cosmic scale.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And Smith argues that this blind obedience can lead to some pretty dangerous outcomes.
Oh, how so?
Well, he points to examples of religious extremism, where people commit horrific acts in the name of God, believing they're doing the right thing just because they're following divine commands.
It's a chilling thought that blind faith could be used to justify those actions.
And beyond the extreme cases, he also argues that this emphasis on obedience can actually stifle critical thinking and personal growth.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
If your main focus is on pleasing God and avoiding punishment,
You're not really thinking for yourself.
right, you're less likely to question those rules, explore different perspectives, or develop your own internal sense of right and wrong.
So instead of cultivating your own moral compass, you're outsourcing your ethical decision-making
Exactly.
to this external authority. But what if that authority is fallible?
Right, or leads you down a dangerous path. That's the risk that Smith highlights.
Yeah.
He argues that this type of morality can create a sense of dependence,
Okay.
even fear.
Fear of what?
Well, you're constantly worried about messing up, incurring God's wrath.
It's being good enough.
Right, and that leads him to critique some of the core virtues that Christianity promotes.
Okay, such as?
Humility,
Uh-huh.
self-sacrifice, and this sense of sinfulness.
Now hold on. How can things like humility and selflessness be harmful? Aren't those generally considered good things?
In moderation, of course. But Smith's cautioning against the kind of humility that leads to self-deprecation,
I see.
the self-sacrifice that leaves you depleted and resentful,
Okay.
and this focus on sin that makes you feel inherently unworthy.
So it's about finding that balance.
Right.
Realizing there's a difference between genuine humility and putting yourself down.
Exactly.
Between helping others and sacrificing your own needs entirely.
Smith is advocating for a more self-affirming approach to morality,
Okay.
one that recognizes our inherent worth as human beings,
Mm-hmm.
encourages us to strive for personal fulfillment, not just blind obedience to a set of rules.
It's like saying it's okay to be proud of your accomplishments, to set boundaries, prioritize your own well-being.
Right, it's not inherently selfish to take care of yourself.
And this ties back to Smith's earlier points about reason and human well-being.
It does, yeah.
He believes that a truly moral life is one that's grounded in our understanding of human nature,
Right, our need.
our capacity for reason and empathy.
Exactly.
So it's about using our intelligence, our compassion, to figure out what truly leads to a good life.
For ourselves and for others.
For everyone, yeah.
That's the essence of Smith's argument.
Wow, we covered a lot today. From the definition of atheism to this critique of religious morality. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And whether you agree with everything Smith says, there's no denying that Atheism, The Case Against God, is a thought-provoking book.
It really makes you think critically about your own beliefs.
And the foundation of your moral values.
For anyone looking to challenge their assumptions and grapple with the big questions about existence, faith, and morality, I highly recommend checking out Atheism, The Case Against God.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
And until next time, keep those minds open and those conversations flowing.